History is written by the victors, but the victors were never just soldiers, kings, or conquerors. They were bankers, merchants, and those who mastered the silent weapon of power, money. For thousands of years, empires have risen and fallen under the illusion of greatness. They claimed divine favor, destiny, and military superiority. But beneath the banners and the battles, a quieter war raged, a secret war for money. A war that shaped nations, enslaved civilizations, and defined who would rule the world and who would serve it. This is not the story taught in school books. This is the story of how empires were built, not on courage or faith, but on carefully constructed lies. As it begins in the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia. 5,000 years ago, the first cities rose between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The Sumerians invented writing not for poetry or philosophy, but for accounting, to record debts, taxes, and grain storage. The first scribes were not storytellers, they were accountants. From the very beginning, money was not about trade, it was about control. The temples and palaces of Sumer became the first central banks. Priests issued clay tablets as promises of grain, silver, or goods. But these tablets could be traded, a system that looked strikingly familiar to the paper money of later empires. The secret had been discovered early. If you control what people believe has value, you control the people themselves. 8 centuries later, the same idea would birth the great empires of the ancient world. The Egyptians built their civilization on divine kingship, but its power was economic. Pharaohs stored massive grain reserves in state granaries and issued rations to workers instead of paying them in silver or gold. In other words, Egypt ran on a controlled economy, one where every worker was dependent on the state for survival. In Babylon, King Hammurabi's famous code of laws wasn't just about justice. It was an early form of financial regulation, setting interest rates, controlling loans, and defining the punishment for debt default. Debt, the invisible chain, had already become the foundation of empire. By the time of Rome, the formula was perfected. Rome conquered with legions, but it ruled with coinage. Each Roman coin bore the face of the emperor, a daily reminder that the currency itself was an extension of imperial authority. The denarius became more than silver. It became trust, backed by the promise of Rome's eternal stability. But as centuries passed, that trust began to fade. To fight endless wars of extravagance, emperors began debasing the currency, secretly mixing cheap metals into silver coins while claiming their value was unchanged. Inflation followed, prices soared, and ordinary citizens bore the cost. It was, in essence, the first state-sponsored lie of money. When the empire finally fell, it wasn't just the barbarian invasions that destroyed it. It was a loss of faith, not in Rome's gods or armies, but in its money. Fast forward to medieval Europe. Gold and silver still ruled the world, but another power was rising, the power of credit. Merchants in Venice, Florence, and Genoa discovered that they could make wealth appear out of nothing by writing promises on paper. The first bills of exchange allowed money to move faster than gold ever could. In Florence, the Medici family mastered this art. They became the Pope's bankers, financing wars, monarchies, and cathedrals, all while maintaining an illusion of holiness. Behind their pious image, they created a private network of financial control across Europe. It was no longer about kings or armies. It was about who issued the promise. Every loan came with interest. Every debt came with dependency. And soon, monarchs themselves became indebted to the men who printed their money. The secret war for money had entered its next phase, private power over public empires. Well, in the 17th century, Europe witnessed a transformation that changed everything, the birth of central banking. The Dutch were the first to establish a national bank in Amsterdam, a place where merchants could deposit gold and trade paper receipts as currency. The system worked, and the Dutch Empire grew rich. But it was the English who perfected the model with a dangerous twist. In 1604, the Bank of England was born. It was not owned by the crown, but by private investors. In exchange for lending money to the government, they received the right to issue notes, effectively creating money from debt. It was revolutionary and deeply deceptive. For the first time, a nation's power rested not in gold, but in confidence. The belief that paper had value. Wars could now be financed not by taxing citizens, but by borrowing from the future. And every war since, from Napoleon's campaigns to the World Wars, has been fought with money created out of thin air. Behind every empire, there stood a banker, and behind every banker, a hidden motive. As the centuries rolled on, this invisible empire expanded. In the 19th century, the Rothschild family became the undisputed masters of global finance. Their network stretched from London to Vienna, Paris to Naples. They financed kings, armies, and revolutions, often on both sides of the same conflict. After the Battle of Waterloo, a single rumor spread by Rothschild couriers made them the richest family on earth. While others panicked, they bought government bonds at a fraction of their price, knowing that victory was certain. Information had become the new weapon of war. It was no longer just armies that won battles. It was those who controlled the narrative of value. By the early 20th century, the world had become a web of financial dependence. The gold standard, once a symbol of stability, became a tool of manipulation. Nations that owned gold dictated global power. Those without it borrowed. The First World War bankrupted Europe and shifted financial dominance to the United States. But even America learned the same dark truth. Once you control money, you no longer need to conquer nations with armies. You conquer them with loans. In 1944, as World War II neared its end, world leaders met in Bretton Woods. The result was historic. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency, backed by gold. Every other currency would now depend on it. It looked like peace. But in reality, it was a new empire, one built not on territory but on trust. The dollar became the lifeblood of global trade, but trust once again would be tested. In 1971, President Richard Nixon made a shocking announcement. The United States would no longer redeem dollars for gold. Overnight, the world was unmoored. Money was no longer tied to anything real. It was a system built entirely on belief and on lies. Governments could now print without limit. Central banks could manipulate interest rates to create artificial growth. Every boom became bigger, every bust became deeper. The secret war for money had become a war of illusion. And as digital technology emerged, that illusion grew stronger. The numbers on a screen replaced the weight of gold. The concept of value became abstract, detached, invisible. But the mechanism was the same. Central banks printed, debt expanded. People worked harder for money that bought less and less. Meanwhile, those who controlled the system, at the top 1%, learned the oldest trick in history. When a currency begins to die, move your wealth elsewhere. Empires throughout time have repeated this cycle. The Romans debased silver. The Spanish flooded Europe with New World gold and caused inflation. The British Empire printed pounds to fund its colonies. The Americans printed dollars to fund global dominance. Each believed their system was eternal. Each believed the lie until it broke. Today, the battle for money is more complex than ever. It's fought not on battlefields, but in boardrooms, banks, and digital ledgers. Cryptocurrencies challenge the monopoly of central banks. Nations like China build digital currencies tied to surveillance. The United States weaponizes the dollar through sanctions. And emerging nations seek escape from the system entirely. The question is no longer who prints money, but who defines reality. Because in the modern world, money is not metal, paper, or code. It is belief managed by those who know how to manipulate it. The empires of old used religion to maintain obedience. Today's empires use economics. They promise growth, prosperity, and freedom. But beneath the surface, the system demands submission, endless consumption, endless debt, endless trust in paper promises. And as in Rome, Babylon, and Florence, the result is always the same. The rich become gods. The poor become fuel. Look around today. Inflation rises, debts mount. Nations argue over trade, technology, and power. But behind the noise lies the same ancient war, one that began thousands of years ago in dusty temples and golden palaces. A war fought not for land, but for control over value itself. When governments print money, they are not creating wealth. They are redistributing it, silently, invisibly, from those who earn to those who own. It is taxation without legislation, robbery without violence. Every empire that mastered this art called it prosperity, but history called it collapse. When the US dollar eventually weakens, as all currencies do, another empire will rise to replace it. Perhaps digital, perhaps global pay, but the pattern will remain. Each new system promises freedom. Each hides the same chains. Because money, at its core, has never been neutral. It has always been a story, told by the powerful, believed by the masses, and defended with blood. The temples of Mesopotamia, the treasuries of Rome, the vaults of the Bank of England, and the servers of modern Wall Street all served the same purpose, to keep the illusion alive. The illusion that money equals power. The illusion that those who print it deserve to rule. The illusion that value comes from numbers rather than from people. But every illusion eventually cracks. And when it does, the world remembers what money truly is, trust. When that trust is broken, no army, no government, and no empire can survive. The fall of Rome, the collapse of Weimar Germany. The hyperinflation of Zimbabwe, the crises of 2008 and 2020. Each was a reminder the system endures only as long as people believe the story, and belief can vanish in a single night. The secret war for money is still being fought. In your paycheck, your bank account, your taxes, and your future. Most will never see it. Most will never question why they work harder, yet feel poorer. They will blame politicians, companies, or fate, never realizing the real battle has always been over the definition of money itself. Empires come and go, but the game remains the same. Create trust, manipulate value, build lies so convincing that even the victims defend them. That is how empires are built. That is how they endure. And that is how, in the end, they all fall. So the next time you hold a coin, a bill, or stare at the numbers in your bank account, remember, you are looking at the most successful illusion ever created by mankind, an illusion that has conquered nations, rewritten history, and enslaved minds. The secret war for money never ended. It simply changed its form. And until the day humanity learns the truth, that real wealth comes not from money, but from freedom, the empire of lies will continue to rule the world.